The Alpha King's rejection. When she said yes, his world fell apart. The moment Lyra Ashen accepted her rejection before the entire Wolf Kingdom, something impossible happened. The Alpha King's fury ignited into chaos. No Omega had ever agreed to be cast aside. No one had ever walked away with their head high. But Lyra saw what the court couldn't. Darkness wrapped around Ravik Thornhale's soul, a curse devouring him from within, and a future where staying meant her death. Her calm defiance shattered every rule. And now, as the kingdom watches in stunned silence, a war neither of them wanted has just begun. Stay until the end to see how this ends. Like and comment what city you're watching from. The Grand Hall of Thornvale didn't just echo, it judged. Every footfall against the black marble rang out like a sentence being passed, and tonight, Lyra Ashen felt each one hammering into her chest. She stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by a sea of wolves in human form. Nobles, generals, elders with silver threading through their hair and contempt threading through their stares. The chandeliers overhead burned with cold light, casting shadows that seemed to claw at the walls. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered. The sound skittered across the marble like insects. At the far end of the room, seated on a throne carved from ancient stone and iron, was Alpha King Ravik Thornhale. He looked like something carved from a nightmare. Broad-shouldered, sharp-jawed, eyes the color of storm clouds about to break. His dark hair fell just past his collar, and even sitting still he radiated a kind of violence that made the air feel too thick to breathe. Power rolled off him in waves, the kind of power that didn't ask. It took. Lyra had known this moment was coming. She'd felt it in the bond that snapped into place 3 days ago, during the autumn rite when the moon had been full and every unmated wolf in the kingdom had gathered in the sacred grove. The bond had hit her like lightning, sudden, undeniable, absolute. Mate, she'd felt his shock too, felt the exact second he'd recognized her, an Omega from the Ashen line, a family barely clinging to relevance in the outer territories. She wasn't high-born, she wasn't powerful, she was by every measure the court used, nothing. And now, standing here with hundreds of eyes on her, she was about to become even less. Lyra Ashen, Ravik's voice cut through the hall like a blade. She lifted her chin, didn't flinch. She'd learned a long time ago that flinching only made predators bite harder. You stand before this court as my fated mate, Ravik continued, each word precise and cold. Chosen by the old magic, bound by the moon. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some pitying, some amused, most just curious to see how this would play out. Lyra caught sight of Lady Marina near the front, a beta from one of the oldest families, draped in silk and smugness. The woman's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Lyra's hands were steady at her sides, but her wolf was pacing inside her chest, restless and wary. It knew what was coming. So did she. Ravik leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking onto hers. There was something wrong in his eyes, something darker than simple cruelty. She'd noticed it the first time she'd seen him up close, when the bond had forced her into his presence 2 nights ago. A shadow that didn't belong, a flicker of something that moved beneath his skin like smoke trapped under glass. I reject you. The words landed like stones. The hall went silent. Lyra felt the bond shudder, felt the invisible thread connecting them go taut and sharp. It hurt. A deep wrenching ache that spread from her chest outward, like something vital was being ripped away. Her wolf whined, confused and wounded, scratching at the inside of her ribs. But she didn't gasp, didn't cry out, didn't fall to her knees the way the court expected. She just looked at him. I, Alpha King Ravik Thornhale, he said, louder now, his voice filling every corner of the hall. Reject the bond between us. You are not fit to stand beside me. You are not fit to bear my mark. You are nothing to this throne. The bond twisted, fraying at the edges like old rope. Lyra could feel it unraveling, could feel her wolf's panic rising. But she pushed the pain down, buried it deep where no one could see. And then she did the one thing no Omega had ever done in the history of the kingdom. She smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, quiet curve of her lips. But in that moment, it was the loudest thing in the room. I accept, Lyra said clearly. The murmur that had been rippling through the crowd died instantly. Ravik's eyes narrowed. What? I accept your rejection, Lyra repeated, her voice calm and steady. I release you from the bond. I have no desire to stand beside a king who doesn't want me. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the whisper started, sharp, shocked, disbelieving. Did she just... She accepted it? No one accepts. You're supposed to beg. You're supposed to break. Is she insane? Lady Marina's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with something that looked almost like delight. This was gossip that would fuel the court for months. Ravik's expression shifted. The cold indifference cracked, and beneath it, something darker surged to the surface. Rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. He rose from his throne, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. You dare! His voice was low, dangerous, vibrating with the kind of alpha power that made weaker wolves drop to their bellies. Lyra didn't step back. You rejected me, Your Majesty. I'm simply agreeing. Isn't that what you wanted? His jaw clenched so hard she could hear his teeth grind. You think this is a game? I think, Lyra said quietly, meeting his gaze without wavering, that I'm not interested in forcing myself on someone who's made it very clear I'm unwelcome. The rage in his eyes flared hotter, and for a moment she thought he might cross the distance between them and do something reckless. His hands were fists at his sides. His chest heaved. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight, ready to spring. But then his uncle stepped forward from the shadows at the edge of the dais. Lord Valor Thornhale was tall and lean, with silver threaded through his dark hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He moved like water, smooth, controlled, deliberate. He placed a hand on Ravik's shoulder, the gesture light and almost paternal. Your Majesty, Valor said smoothly, his voice like honey poured over gravel. Perhaps we should let the girl leave. There's no point in prolonging this unfortunate situation. Ravik's gaze didn't leave Lyra's face. She doesn't leave until I dismiss her. Of course, Valor murmured, his fingers tightening just slightly on Ravik's shoulder. But the rite is over. The bond is severed. She served her purpose. Lyra saw it then. The flicker of something passing between them. Something unspoken and sharp. Valor's hand stayed on Ravik's shoulder just a fraction too long, and when he pulled away, there was a faint shimmer in the air where his fingers had been, like heat rising from summer stone, like something wrong. Her wolf's hackles rose. There, that shadow she'd seen in Ravik's eyes. It wasn't his. It was crawling up from Valor's touch. She forced herself to stay still, to keep her expression neutral. She couldn't let them see that she'd noticed. Not yet. Not here, in front of the entire court. Am I dismissed, Your Majesty? She asked quietly. Ravik's hands curled into fists at his sides. His wolf was clawing at him. She could see it in the way his muscles tensed, the way his breathing had gone rough and uneven. The bond might be rejected, but it wasn't gone. Not completely. And his wolf was furious, confused, desperate. Get out, Ravik growled. Lyra bowed her head, just enough to satisfy protocol, and turned. The crowd parted for her like water, silent and watchful. She walked through them with her spine straight and her chin high, even though every step felt like walking through fire. The bond was screaming at her to turn back, to stay, to fix this. But she kept walking. She didn't look back. The halls outside this grand hall were quieter, but no less hostile. Servants pressed themselves against the walls as she passed, eyes downcast. Guards watched her with expressions somewhere between pity and disdain. A young beta male smirked as she walked by, and she heard him mutter something under his breath. His companion laughed. Lyra kept walking. Her rooms were in the east wing, far from the royal quarters, far from the court's inner circle. She'd been given them 3 days ago, after the bond had snapped into place, and protocol demanded she be housed within the palace walls until the formal rejection ceremony. They were small but clean, with a narrow bed, a writing desk, a wash basin, and a window that overlooked the training grounds. She shut the door behind her and leaned against it, finally letting herself breathe. Her hands were shaking. The bond was still there, frayed and broken, but not gone. She could feel it like a bruise, tender and aching, and beneath that she could feel him. His rage, his confusion, the relentless, gnawing hunger of whatever darkness was wrapped around his soul. She crossed to the window and looked out at the sprawling fortress below. Thornvale was a city built on power, stone walls 50 feet high, towers that pierced the sky, banners bearing the Thornhill crest snapping in the wind. Beyond the walls, the forest stretched out in all directions, dark and ancient and full of things that didn't answer to kings. It was beautiful in a brutal, unforgiving way, and it was rotting from the inside. Lyra had seen it the moment she'd stepped foot in the capital, the way the nobles watched each other with suspicion, the way the servants moved too quickly, too quietly, their eyes always darting toward the shadows. The way Ravik's own generals looked at him with something that wasn't quite loyalty anymore. Something was very, very wrong, and now that she'd walked away from the bond, she was free to do something about it. A soft knock on the door made her turn. "Come in," she called. The door opened and a young woman slipped inside, a maid, maybe 17, with dark hair pulled back in a braid and wide, nervous eyes. She carried a tray with tea and bread. "Miss Ashen," the girl whispered. I brought you something to eat." Lyra gestured to the desk. "Thank you. What's your name?" "Mira, miss." The girl set the tray down, hands trembling slightly. She hesitated, then glanced toward the door as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "You shouldn't have done that," Mira whispered. Lyra raised an eyebrow. "Done what?" "Accepted the rejection." The girl's eyes were bright with fear. "No one does that. The court, they'll think you're mocking him. They'll come for you." "Let them," Lyra said quietly, pouring herself a cup of tea. It was still hot, fragrant with herbs she didn't recognize. Mira shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. The king, he's not—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "He's not himself anymore. People have noticed. And the ones who notice too much, they disappear." Lyra's pulse quickened. She set the cup down carefully. "Disappear?" "3 nobles in the last 6 months," Mira whispered, stepping closer. "All of them questioned the king's decisions. All of them spoke out in council. All of them gone." "Where?" "No one knows. But people say—" The girl's voice dropped even lower. "They say Lord Vylor took care of it. They say he has them arrested in the night. They say the dungeons beneath the palace go deeper than anyone knows." Lyra's stomach tightened. "And no one's investigated?" Mira looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. "Who would dare? Lord Valor is the king's closest advisor, his uncle, the only family the king has left. And anyone who questions him disappears," Lyra finished. Mira nodded miserably. Lyra studied the girl for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Mira said, her voice barely audible, "you're the first person who stood up to him in months. The first person who didn't just fold. And I thought you should know what you're walking into." "I appreciate the warning," Lyra said gently, "but I'm not planning to disappear." Mira looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just nodded and slipped back out of the room, closing the door softly behind her. Lyra stood alone in the silence, her mind racing. 3 nobles, 6 months, and Valor's shadow wrapped around the king's soul like a parasite. She crossed to the desk and pulled out a piece of parchment from the drawer. Her handwriting was neat and precise as she began to write, listing everything she'd noticed, every flicker of shadow, every moment Valor's hand had lingered too long on Ravik's shoulder, every flash of wrongness in the king's eyes. She was halfway through when the door slammed open. Ravik stood in the doorway, breathing hard, his eyes blazing with fury. "You!" he snarled. Lyra didn't move. She calmly set down her pen. "Your Majesty." He crossed the room in 3 strides and slammed his hands down on the desk, caging her in. His face was inches from hers, and she could feel the heat rolling off him, could smell the wild, dangerous scent of his wolf. "What the hell did you just do?" he demanded. "I accepted your rejection," Lyra said calmly, not breaking eye contact. "Exactly as you wanted." "No one accepts!" His voice was a roar, his wolf rising just beneath his skin. She could see it in his eyes, gold bleeding into the gray, feral and furious. "You're supposed to—" "Beg?" Lyra interrupted. "Cry? Throw myself at your feet and plead for you to reconsider?" His jaw worked. "Yes. I'm not interested in begging for scraps, Lyra said quietly, and I'm certainly not interested in forcing a bond on someone who clearly doesn't want it. Revik stared at her, his chest heaving. The rage in his eyes was so intense it should have been terrifying. But beneath it, Lyra saw something else. Pain. His wolf was tearing him apart. She could see it in the way his hands trembled against the desk, the way his breath came too fast, too shallow. The bond might be rejected, but his wolf didn't care. It wanted her, needed her, and every second she stood this close was making it worse. You don't get to just walk away, Revik said, his voice rough. I'm not walking away, Lyra said. You told me to leave. I'm leaving. You're mine. The word came out like a growl, possessive and primal. No, Lyra said softly. I'm not. Something in Ravik's expression cracked. For just a moment, the rage fell away, and she saw the man beneath it, exhausted, haunted, breaking. His eyes searched hers, desperate and lost. And then the shadow surged. His eyes went black. Lyra's breath caught. It was fast, just a flicker gone in an instant, but she saw it. The darkness that wrapped around him like chains, pulling him under, drowning him from the inside. Ravik jerked back as if he'd been burned. His hands left the desk, and he staggered backward, his breathing ragged. He looked down at his hands like he didn't recognize them. Get out, he said, his voice hoarse. Lyra didn't move. What's happening to you? I said get out. The command hit her like a physical force, alpha power, raw and undeniable, crashing over her in waves. Her wolf whimpered and dropped low, instinct warring with will. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to obey, to submit, to bow. But Lyra didn't bow. She met his gaze, saw the war raging behind his eyes, and made a choice. No, she said quietly. Revik froze. What? I'm not leaving, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the weight of his power pressing down on her. Not until you tell me what's wrong. Nothing is wrong. You're dying. The words hung in the air between them. Ravik went very, very still. I can see it, Lyra continued, stepping closer, even though her wolf was screaming at her to retreat. The shadow around you, the way it moves when your uncle touches you, whatever's happening to you, it's killing you, slowly. And he knows. For a long moment, Ravik just stared at her. His expression was unreadable. Shock, fury, disbelief, all warring for dominance. Then he laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that had nothing to do with humor. You're insane. Maybe, Lyra said, but I'm right. Ravik turned away, running a hand through his hair. His shoulders were tight with tension. Even if you were, which you're not, what do you think you could do about it? I don't know yet, Lyra admitted, but I'm going to find out. He looked back at her, his expression hardening. Why? Because, Lyra said quietly, someone has to. They stood there in the heavy silence, the broken bond humming between them like a half-remembered song. The air felt thick, charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Finally Ravik spoke, his voice low and dangerous. If you're lying, if this is some kind of game, it's not. I will destroy you. Lyra held his gaze. Understood. Ravik's jaw tightened. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead he turned and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold, his back to her. Stay away from my uncle, he said quietly, and then he was gone. Lyra didn't sleep that night. She sat at the desk, writing and planning and mapping out everything she knew. The candle burned low, wax pooling at the base, but she kept working. Her mind was racing too fast to rest. The castle had a library. She'd seen it on her way through the halls. Tomorrow, she'd start there. Look for records, histories, anything that might explain what kind of curse could wrap around an Alpha King and slowly drain him dry. But first, she needed to understand the layout of this place, the power structure. Who was loyal to Ravik and who was loyal to Vailor? Who could be trusted and who couldn't? She pulled out another piece of parchment and began sketching a rough map of the palace from memory. The grand hall at the center, the throne room, the council chambers, the east wing where she was housed, the west wing where the royal family lived, and beneath it all, the dungeons Mira had mentioned. the ones that supposedly went deeper than anyone knew. A chill ran down her spine. Outside her window, the moon hung high and cold, casting silver light across the training grounds below. She could see guards making their rounds, torches bobbing in the darkness. Somewhere in the castle, Ravik was probably pacing his rooms, fighting his wolf, fighting the shadow that was killing him. And somewhere else, probably in the tower that overlooked the western courtyard, Lord Valor Thornhale was smiling in the dark. Because Lyra Ashen had just done exactly what he'd hoped she would. She'd stayed. The next morning came too soon. Lyra woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of the palace coming to life. Servants moving through the halls, guards changing shifts, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer from the forges. She washed her face in the basin, changed into a simple dress, dark green wool, practical and unadorned, and braided her hair back from her face. When she looked in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. Her eyes looked older, harder, good. She'd need to be hard to survive what was coming. A knock on the door made her turn. She opened it to find Mira standing there with a tray of breakfast, bread, cheese, and some kind of dried meat. "Morning, miss," Mira said quietly, slipping inside. "Morning." Lyra took the tray and set it on the desk. "Any news?" Mira glanced toward the door, then leaned in close. "The whole palace is talking about what you did. Half of them think you're brilliant. The other half think you've lost your mind." "And which half are you in?" Mira smiled slightly. "Still deciding," Lyra laughed despite herself. "Fair enough." "There's something else," Mira said, her expression sobering. "Lord Valor requested an audience with you." Lyra's blood ran cold. "When?" "This afternoon. In his study." Of course he did. He wanted to know what she was planning, wanted to take her measure, wanted to decide if she was a threat. "Did he say what it was about?" Lyra asked. "No, just that he wanted to welcome you properly to court." Mira's tone made it clear what she thought of that. Lyra nodded slowly. "Thank you for letting me know." Mira hesitated. "Miss Ashen, be careful. Lord Valor he's dangerous. More dangerous than people realize." "I know," Lyra said quietly. "But I don't have a choice." After Mira left, Lyra forced herself to eat, even though her stomach was in knots. She needed her strength, needed to be sharp. Then she left her rooms and headed for the library. The Royal Library of Thornvale was breathtaking. It occupied an entire wing of the palace, with ceilings that soared 3 stories high and walls lined floor to ceiling with books. Sunlight poured in through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The smell of old paper and leather bindings filled her lungs. Lyra had never seen so many books in one place. An elderly librarian sat at a desk near the entrance, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He looked up as she approached. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice dry and crackly. "I'm looking for histories," Lyra said. "Specifically, anything about curses or dark magic affecting wolves." The librarian's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a specific request." "I'm doing research," Lyra said smoothly, "for personal interest." The old man studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward a section in the back. "Third floor. Section marked Ancient Practices. But I warn you, most of those texts are very old. Handle them carefully." "I will. Thank you." Lyra climbed the spiral staircase to the 3rd floor, her footsteps echoing in the quiet. The section the librarian had indicated was tucked away in a corner, barely lit by the windows. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles. The Old Magic and Its Consequences. Blood Rites of the Northern Pacts. Curses, Hexes, and the Shadow Arts. She pulled that one from the shelf and settled into a chair near the window. The book was heavy, bound in dark leather that felt strange under her fingers. Almost warm, almost alive. She opened it carefully, the pages brittle with age. The text was dense, written in an old dialect she had to struggle to read. But she persisted, skimming through chapters on hexes and blood curses and binding spells. And then she found it. The Devouring Shadow. Her heart started to pound. The passage described a rare and ancient curse, one that required intimate contact with the victim. Touch, usually repeated over time. The curse would attach itself to the victim's soul, feeding on their life force, their strength, their very essence. To the outside world, the victim would appear to be themselves. But slowly, over months or years, the shadow would consume them from within. The symptoms matched what she'd seen in Ravik, the flashes of darkness in his eyes, the way his wolf seemed at war with itself, the exhaustion beneath the rage. But there was more. The curse could only be cast by someone the victim trusted, someone close, someone who had regular access to them. Lyra's hands tightened on the book. His uncle. She kept reading, her pulse racing. The curse was nearly impossible to break. It required three things: identifying the source of the curse, severing the connection between the caster and the victim, and a willing sacrifice. Someone who would take the curse into themselves long enough for it to be destroyed. A willing sacrifice. Lyra closed the book slowly, her mind reeling. She sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the forest beyond the palace walls, thinking about kings and curses and sacrifices, thinking about a bond she'd rejected but couldn't quite let go. Lord Vaelor's study was in the western tower, just as Lyra had guessed. She stood outside the heavy oak door that afternoon, her heart hammering in her chest. She'd spent the hours since leaving the library preparing herself, mentally rehearsing what she would say, how she would act. She needed to seem harmless. Curious, maybe, but not threatening. She knocked. "Come in," Valor's voice called from inside. Lyra pushed open the door. The study was elegant in a way that felt calculated. Dark wood furniture, expensive rugs, shelves lined with books and artifacts. A fire crackled in the hearth, and behind a massive desk sat Lord Vaelor Thornhale, looking every inch the concerned uncle. "Miss Ashen," he said, rising with a smile. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." Lyra sat in the chair across from his desk, keeping her posture relaxed, her expression neutral. Vaelor poured 2 glasses of wine and slid one across the desk toward her. "I wanted to speak with you about yesterday's unfortunate events." "The rejection," Lyra said. "Yes." Vaelor's smile didn't waver. "It must have been quite difficult for you." "It was what it was," Lyra said carefully. "The king made his choice. I respected it." "Indeed." Vaelor leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You handled it with remarkable grace. Most Omegas would have been devastated." "I'm not most Omegas." "No," Vaelor said softly. "See that?" Silence stretched between them, heavy and watchful. "I wanted to apologize," Vaelor finally said. "My nephew can be harsh. The pressures of the throne have weighed heavily on him these past months. He hasn't been himself." There it was, the opening. Lyra tilted her head slightly. "I noticed. He seems unwell." Vaelor's expression flickered, just for a moment, before smoothing back into concern. "He's been under a great deal of stress. Running a kingdom is no easy task." "Of course," Lyra said, "though I couldn't help but notice he seems more than just stressed, almost like something's eating at him from the inside." Vaelor's eyes sharpened. "You're very observant." "I pay attention," Lyra said simply. Another silence. Vaelor took a sip of his wine, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You know," he said finally, "you're welcome to stay at court for a few days. Despite the rejection, it would be unseemly to send you away immediately. Take some time to recover from the ordeal." "It wasn't an invitation, it was a test." "That's very kind of you," Lyra said. "I think I will. I've always wanted to see Thornvale properly." Vaelor smiled. "Excellent. I'll make sure you're given access to the palace grounds. Explore as you like." "Thank you, Lord Vaelor." "Please," he said, his smile widening. "Call me Vaelor." Lyra left the study 20 minutes later, her skin crawling. He knew. He didn't know what she knew, but he knew she was paying attention. And he was watching her now. She walked quickly back to her rooms, her mind racing. She needed to be more careful, needed to move faster, because Vaelor wasn't just going to let her wander around uncovering his secrets. He was going to eliminate her. The only question was when. That night, Lyra dreamed. She was standing in the throne room, but it was empty, silent. The chandeliers overhead were dark, and shadows pooled in the corners like living things. Ravik stood before the throne, his back to her, but when he turned, his eyes were completely black. The shadow had consumed him entirely. "You can't save me," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "You should have run." "I don't run," Lyra heard herself say. "Then you'll die here." The shadows rushed forward, wrapping around her, pulling her under. She woke gasping, her heart pounding. Moonlight streamed through her window. The palace was silent, but Lyra knew, with a certainty that sank into her bones, that she was running out of time. She got up, lit a candle, and went back to her notes. If Veilor was going to make his move, she needed to be ready. And if saving Ravik meant walking into the darkness herself, then that's exactly what she'd do, because someone had to. And apparently, that someone was her. Outside her window, clouds drifted across the moon, and in the western tower, Lord Veilor Thornhill sat awake in his study, staring at the flickering fire, smiling. The attack came on her fourth night in the palace. Lyra woke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her room. Too many, too quiet, moving with the kind of coordination that spoke of training. Her wolf surged awake instantly, hackles raised, sensing danger. She rolled out of bed and grabbed the iron poker from beside the cold fireplace. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The footsteps stopped outside her door. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the wall, poker raised. The door handle turned slowly, testing, locked. She'd made sure of that before going to sleep. A pause. Then the sharp crack of wood splintering as someone kicked the door in. 3 men poured into the room, dressed in dark clothes with their faces covered. Not palace guards. Hired muscle. The first one lunged for her. Lyra swung the poker hard, catching him across the temple. He went down with a grunt, blood streaming from his scalp. The second one grabbed her from behind, arms wrapping around her chest and pinning her arms. She drove her heel down onto his instep, then slammed her head backward into his nose. He howled and released her. The third one was faster, smarter. He caught her wrist as she swung the poker again and twisted hard, forcing her to drop it. His other hand went to her throat. "Lord Veilor sends his regards," he hissed. Lyra clawed at his hand, gasping for air. Black spots danced across her vision. Her wolf was screaming, trying to shift, but the hand on her throat was cutting off everything: air, sound, thought. Then the man's grip suddenly released. Lyra collapsed to the floor, coughing and gasping. Through watering eyes, she saw Ravik standing in her doorway, his hand wrapped around the assassin's throat. The king's eyes were blazing gold, his wolf fully surfaced. "Who sent you?" Ravik's voice was barely recognizable, more growl than words. The man gagged, trying to pry Ravik's fingers loose. Ravik slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. "I asked you a question." "Go to hell," the man spat. Something dark flickered across Ravik's face. The shadow. Lyra saw it surge, saw his eyes go black for just a second before he crushed the man's windpipe. The assassin crumpled to the floor, dead. Ravik turned to the other 2. One was still unconscious, bleeding from the head wound Lyra had given him. The other was scrambling toward the door, holding his broken nose. "Run," Ravik said quietly. The man didn't need to be told twice. He bolted. Ravik let him go, then crossed to Lyra. She was still on the floor, one hand pressed to her bruised throat, the other clutching the wall for support. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough but no longer inhuman. "I'm fine," Lyra managed, though her voice came out hoarse and scraped. Ravik's jaw tightened. He crouched down beside her, his eyes scanning her face, her throat, looking for injuries. "You're bleeding." She touched her lip and her fingers came away red. She hadn't even felt it happen. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." Ravik stood and held out a hand. "Can you walk?" Lyra ignored the hand and pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were shaky, but she stayed upright. "I said I'm fine." "Stubborn," Ravik muttered, but there was something almost like approval in his tone. "You came," Lyra said, studying him. "How did you know?" "I didn't. I was patrolling." He looked away, uncomfortable. "I've been keeping watch. At night. Because you don't trust your own guards." Ravik's expression hardened. "No, because I don't trust my uncle." The admission hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Lyra glanced at the dead man on her floor, then at the broken door. He said Valor sent them. I know. And you're going to do what, exactly? Accuse your uncle of attempted murder based on the word of a dead assassin? Ravik's hands curled into fists. What do you suggest? I suggest, Lyra said, stepping closer and lowering her voice, that we start gathering real evidence, the kind that even the council can't ignore. We? Ravik's eyes narrowed. There is no we. You were supposed to leave. Well, I didn't, and now someone just tried to kill me, which means I'm staying until I figure out what the hell is happening in this kingdom. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, Lyra said, but at least I'll die doing something that matters. Ravik stared at her for a long moment. The bond between them, broken, frayed, but still there, hummed with something that felt like grudging respect. You're insane, he said finally. So you've mentioned. A muscle ticked in Ravik's jaw. If you're staying, you're moving to the royal wing, somewhere I can actually protect you. I don't need your protection. You have it anyway. His tone left no room for argument. Pack your things. You're moving tonight. Before Lyra could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Palace guards appeared in the doorway, weapons drawn, eyes wide as they took in the scene. The broken door, the dead body, their king standing in an Omega's bedroom in the middle of the night. Your Majesty, the captain said carefully. We heard a disturbance. 3 assassins, Ravik said flatly. Deal with the bodies, and find the one who ran. I want him alive. Yes, Your Majesty. The captain hesitated. Should we inform Lord Valor? No. Ravik's voice was ice. You inform no one except me. Understood? The captain's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, maybe, or unease, but he nodded. Understood. Ravik turned back to Lyra. Move. Now. This time, she didn't argue. The royal wing was on the opposite side of the palace, connected to the throne room by a private corridor. The rooms Ravik assigned her were 3 times the size of her previous quarters, with a sitting room, a bedroom, a private bath, and windows that overlooked the entire city. There are guards posted at both ends of the corridor, Ravik said, as Mira, who'd been summoned despite the late hour, helped Lyra settle in. No one gets in without my permission. What about Valor? Lyra asked. Ravik's expression darkened. Especially not Valor. After he left, Mira turned to Lyra with wide eyes. Miss Ashen, what happened? Someone tried to kill me. Mira went pale. I told you they'd come for you. You did. Lyra sat down on the edge of the massive bed, suddenly exhausted. Her throat ached, her head was pounding. Thank you for warning me. Lot of good it did, Mira muttered, then caught herself. Sorry, miss, that was honest, Lyra finished, and I appreciate honesty. Mira was quiet for a moment, then sat down beside her. Why are you doing this? Why not just leave? The king rejected you. You don't owe him anything. Lyra looked down at her hands. Because he's dying, Mira. And if he dies, Valor takes the throne. And if Valor takes the throne, the kingdom falls, Mira whispered. Yes. Mira studied her for a long moment. You really think you can save him? I have to try. The girl nodded slowly. Then I'll help. However I can. Lyra looked at her in surprise. Mira? I'm serious. You're going to need someone who knows this palace. Someone who can move around without being noticed. And that's me. Mira's jaw set stubbornly. Besides, if Lord Valor becomes king, people like me don't last long. I'd rather fight. Despite everything, Lyra smiled. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Mira said. We might both end up dead. Cheerful thought. Just being realistic. Mira stood. Get some rest. I'll be back in the morning with breakfast. And information, if I can find any. After she left, Lyra lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Her body ached, her throat hurt, but her mind was racing too fast to sleep. Valor had made his move, which meant she was running out of time. She needed to get into those dungeons, needed to find proof of what he'd done to the missing nobles, needed something concrete that she could bring before the council. But more than that, she needed to figure out how to break the curse, A willing sacrifice, the book had said. Someone who would take the curse into themselves long enough for it to be destroyed. Lyra closed her eyes and touched the place where the bond still hummed, broken but not gone. She already knew who that someone would have to be. Morning came with pale winter light and the sound of the city waking below. Lyra dressed in a gown Mira had brought her, deep blue wool with silver embroidery at the cuffs, and braided her hair in a crown around her head. If she was going to survive the court, she needed to look like she belonged there. Breakfast arrived with Mira, along with news. "The council is meeting this morning," Mira said quietly as she poured tea. "Emergency session. Everyone's talking about the attack on you last night." "What are they saying?" "That you staged it to get the king's attention." Mira's expression was apologetic. "Lady Marina started the rumor. It's spreading fast." Of course she did. Lyra took a sip of tea, thinking. What about the assassin who escaped? No sign of him. But they found the one you knocked unconscious. Mira hesitated. "He's dead." Lyra's hand stilled on her cup. "Dead how?" "Poison. In his cell sometime before dawn. The guards claim they didn't see anyone enter." "Baylor's cleaning up loose ends," Lyra said quietly. "That's what I thought." Mira glanced toward the door. "Miss Ashen, you're going to attend the council meeting, aren't you?" "Yes." "They're going to tear you apart." "Let them try." The council chamber was smaller than the grand hall, but no less intimidating. A long table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by high-backed chairs. Maps and documents covered the walls, and seated around the table were the most powerful wolves in the kingdom. Lyra entered with her head high, ignoring the stares. Ravik sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Valor sat at his right hand, looking concerned and fatherly. The rest of the council, 7 nobles, 3 generals, and the High Elder, watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "Miss Ashen," Valor said smoothly. "Thank you for joining us. We were just discussing last night's unfortunate incident." "Unfortunate," Lyra repeated, taking the empty seat near the far end of the table. "That's one word for it." Lady Marina, seated across from her, smiled coldly. "Forgive us for being suspicious, Miss Ashen, but it does seem rather convenient. You accept the king's rejection, refuse to leave, and then suddenly you're the victim of an attack that conveniently brings you even closer to His Majesty." "Are you suggesting I hired assassins to attack myself?" Lyra asked. "I'm suggesting," Marina said delicately, "that desperate Omegas have been known to do desperate things." Several council members nodded. Lyra saw the trap closing. This was coordinated. Valor had planted the seeds, and now his allies were watering them. "Enough," Ravik said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. 3 men broke into her rooms with the intent to kill her. I was there. I saw it. This isn't a game." "Of course not, Your Majesty," Valor said. "But Lady Marina raises a valid point. We need to investigate all possibilities." "The only thing we need to investigate," Ravik said coldly, "is who hired those men. And I want that investigation to be thorough." "Naturally," Valor said. "Though I'm afraid the one survivor has already passed. Poison, we believe. Self-administered before he could be questioned." Lyra watched Valor's face carefully. His expression was perfectly neutral, perfectly concerned, but she saw the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. "How convenient," she said quietly. Valor turned to her, his smile never wavering. "I'm sorry?" "I said how convenient, that the only witness died before anyone could question him." The temperature in the room dropped. "Miss Ashen," Valor said, his voice taking on an edge, "are you implying something?" "I'm stating a fact," Lyra said. "The man who could have told us who hired him is dead. That's convenient for whoever wanted him silenced." "How dare you?" Lady Marina started. "She has a point," General Cade interrupted. "He was an older wolf, scarred and grizzled, with a reputation for blunt honesty. It is suspicious." "Everything is suspicious if you're looking for conspiracy," Valor said smoothly. "The simplest explanation is often the correct one. The man was caught. He knew he'd face execution. He took his own life." "With poison he happened to have hidden on him?" Lyra asked. Poison that works fast enough that the guards didn't notice until he was already dead? Valor's smile tightened. Are you an expert on poisons now, Miss Ashen? No, but I know when something doesn't add up. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Ravik was watching the exchange with narrowed eyes, his hands flat on the table. Enough, he said finally. We're investigating. That's final. General Cade, I want you to personally oversee the inquiry. Report directly to me, no one else. Cade nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. And Miss Ashen, Ravik continued, his gaze swinging to her, you will remain in the royal wing until we determine the source of the threat. It wasn't a request. As you wish, Your Majesty, Lyra said. The meeting continued for another hour, covering topics that had nothing to do with assassination attempts, trade agreements, border disputes, grain stores for the coming winter. Lyra listened carefully, noting who spoke and who stayed silent, noting who deferred to Valor and who seemed to resist him. The kingdom was divided, not openly, not yet, but the cracks were there. When the council finally dismissed, Lyra was the first to rise. She needed air, needed space to think. She was halfway down the corridor when Ravik caught up to her. That was reckless, he said. What was? Accusing Valor in front of the entire council. Lyra stopped and turned to face him. I didn't accuse him of anything. I pointed out facts. You painted a target on your back. The target was already there, Lyra said. Someone tried to kill me last night. Remember? Ravik's jaw clenched. All the more reason to be careful. I'm done being careful. Lyra stepped closer, lowering her voice. Your uncle is killing you. He's consolidating power. He's eliminating anyone who might oppose him. And if we don't stop him soon, there won't be a kingdom left to save. You think I don't know that? Ravik's voice was rough, strained. You think I haven't noticed what's happening? Then do something about it. I am. The words came out like a snarl. But I can't just arrest my own uncle without proof. The council would tear itself apart. The kingdom would descend into civil war. So we get proof, Lyra said. How? Ravik demanded. He's been one step ahead of us this entire time. Every piece of evidence disappears. Every witness dies. Every trail goes cold. Lyra met his gaze steadily. Then we set a trap. Ravik went still. What kind of trap? The kind that makes him show his hand. Lyra's mind was already racing, pieces clicking into place. He thinks I'm a threat now. After what I said in the council meeting, he'll move against me again. Soon, we use that. Absolutely not. Listen, no, I'm not using you as bait. You don't have a choice, Lyra said quietly. He's already hunting me. We might as well use it to our advantage. Ravik stared at her, and she saw the war raging behind his eyes. The king who couldn't afford to show weakness. The man who didn't want to see her hurt. The wolf who still thought of her as his, bond or no bond. I won't let you die for this, he said finally. I don't plan to die, Lyra said. But I plan to win. There's a difference. Before Ravik could respond, Valor's voice echoed down the corridor. Your Majesty, might I have a word? Ravik's expression shuddered. Later, he said to Lyra, then turned to face his uncle. Lyra didn't wait around to hear what Valor wanted. She headed back to her rooms, her mind churning. She needed to move faster. Valor was already making his next play. She could feel it. When she entered her chambers, she found Mira waiting, her face pale. What's wrong? Lyra asked. I found something, Mira whispered. In the servants' quarters, a guard was talking. He said Lord Valor has been visiting the old dungeons, the deep ones, the ones no one's supposed to use anymore. Lyra's pulse quickened. When? Every few days. Always at night. Always alone. That's where they are, Lyra said quietly. The missing nobles. That's where he's keeping them. Or their bodies, Mira said. Lyra crossed to the window, looking out at the sprawling palace grounds. Somewhere beneath her feet, buried in the foundation of the fortress, were dungeons that predated the current palace. Tunnels and cells carved into the bedrock itself. If she could get down there, if she could find proof. I need to get into those dungeons, she said. That's suicide, Mira said flatly. Even if you could find the entrance, even if you could get past the guards, Lord Valor has it watched. You'd never make it out. Then I'll need a distraction. Mira stared at her. You're serious. Completely. When? Lyra turned to face her. Tomorrow night, during the feast. Every month, the palace held a formal feast to honor the moon. It was tradition, attended by the entire court. Everyone would be in the great hall, including Valor. It was the best chance she'd get. I'll help, Mira said. But we need a plan. A real one. Not just sneak into the dungeons and hope for the best. Agreed. Lyra pulled out parchment and ink. Let's start mapping it out. They worked late into the night, planning every detail. The feast started at sunset. Mira would create a disturbance in the kitchens. Nothing serious, just enough to pull some of the guards away. Lyra would slip out during the chaos and make her way to the old dungeon entrance, which, according to Mira, was hidden in the eastern cellars behind a false wall. She'd have maybe an hour, maybe less. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The feast was everything Lyra had expected, excessive, loud, and full of political maneuvering disguised as small talk. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that Ravik had sent to her rooms with a terse note. Wear this. You need to look like you belong here. She did belong here, just not in the way anyone expected. The great hall glittered with candlelight and jewels. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, winter vegetables, and wine that flowed like water. Musicians played in the gallery above. Nobles laughed and gossiped and schemed. Lyra sat at the high table, several seats down from Ravik, who was deep in conversation with General Cade. Valor sat on Ravik's other side, playing the role of devoted uncle perfectly. Every so often, Valor's gaze would drift to Lyra, and he'd smile. Like he knew exactly what she was planning. It made her skin crawl. She forced herself to eat, to smile at the right moments, to nod politely when people spoke to her. All the while, her eyes tracked the guards positioned around the hall, counting them, noting their patterns. An hour into the feast, Mira appeared in the doorway and caught Lyra's eye. A tiny nod. It was time. Lyra excused herself quietly, claiming she needed air. No one paid much attention. She slipped out of the hall and into the corridor beyond, her heart pounding. The kitchens erupted in chaos just as she reached the servants' stairwell. She heard shouting, the crash of breaking dishes, Mira's voice raised in what sounded like genuine panic. The guards in the corridor turned and hurried toward the noise. Lyra didn't hesitate. She lifted her skirts and ran. The eastern cellars were exactly where Mira had said they'd be. Down 3 flights of stairs, through a storage room filled with grain sacks and wine barrels, and into a narrow corridor that smelled of damp stone and earth. The false wall was harder to find than she'd expected. She ran her hands along the stones, searching for the mechanism Mira had described. There. A loose brick, slightly cooler than the others. She pressed it. The walls shuddered and swung inward, revealing a dark passage beyond. Lyra pulled a candle from her pocket, one of the thick ones that wouldn't blow out easily, and lit it with the flint she'd borrowed from Mira. Then she stepped into the darkness. The passage sloped downward, the air growing colder with every step. The walls were rough-hewn stone, ancient and solid. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. The silence pressed against her ears. She walked for what felt like forever, but was probably only minutes. Then the passage opened into a wider chamber. Cells lined both sides, their iron bars rusted but still solid. Most were empty, but 3 weren't. Lyra's breath caught. The bodies were desiccated, mummified by the dry cold of the deep dungeons. But she recognized one of them, Lord Tessian, a noble who'd supposedly left court to tend to family business 6 months ago. He'd never left at all. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said from the darkness. Lyra spun, nearly dropping the candle. Valor stepped out of the shadows, his expression calm and almost disappointed. "I had hoped you'd be smarter than this, Miss Ashen," he said, "sneaking into my dungeons." "Really?" Lyra's hand went to the small knife she'd hidden in the folds of her dress. "You killed them." "I removed obstacles," Valor corrected. "There's a difference." "Not really." Valor smiled. "You think you've found your proof. You think you'll run back upstairs and expose me to the council, to my nephew. You think you'll save the day." "Something like that," Lyra said, backing toward the passage entrance. "You won't make it that far." Valor moved faster than she'd expected, wolf fast, inhuman. He caught her wrist and twisted, sending the knife clattering to the ground. Lyra drove her knee up, aiming for his groin, but he blocked it. His other hand wrapped around her throat. "You should have left when you had the chance," he said softly. Lyra clawed at his hand, gasping. Black spots danced across her vision. "Not again. Not like this." "I could kill you here," Valor continued conversationally. "Make it look like you got lost exploring and fell. Or I could use you. Use the bond my foolish nephew thinks he broke. Let him watch while I drain the life out of you the way I've been draining him." Through the haze of oxygen deprivation, Lyra saw it. The shadow coiling around Violor like living smoke. The same shadow that wrapped around Ravik. "Curious, isn't it?" Valor said. "The old magic. How it responds to blood, to will. My brother thought he could rule without understanding it, without mastering it. That's why I had to remove him." Lyra's eyes widened. "Oh yes," Valor said. "The late king's hunting accident? Not so accidental. Just like dear Ravik's impending death, won't be accidental. Just like yours won't be." His grip tightened. And then something inside Lyra snapped. The bond, broken, rejected, but never truly severed, suddenly blazed to life. She felt Ravik's rage, his terror, his wolf roaring to the surface. He was coming. Valor felt it too. His eyes widened, and he released her throat, stumbling back. Lyra collapsed to the ground, coughing and gasping, but she forced herself to move, crawling toward the passage entrance, toward escape. "It doesn't matter," Valor called after her. "Even if you tell him, he can't touch me. The curse is too deep now. He'll be dead within days, and then the throne is mine." Lyra made it to the passage and ran. Behind her, Valor's laughter echoed through the dungeons like a promise of death. Lyra's lungs burned as she tore through the passage, her candle flickering wildly in the darkness. Behind her, Valor's laughter faded, but she knew he wasn't following. He didn't need to. He'd already won, or thought he had. She burst through the false wall and into the storage room, nearly colliding with a stack of grain sacks. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely push the wall back into place, but she managed it. Then she ran. The corridors were still chaos. Mir's distraction had worked better than planned. A fire had broken out in the kitchens, and servants were rushing everywhere with buckets of water. Guards shouted orders. No one paid attention to one more person running through the halls. Lyra made it to her chambers and slammed the door behind her. She leaned against it, gasping, her throat raw where Valor's fingers had pressed. The bond was still thrumming, frantic and wild. She could feel Ravik's fury like a storm building. He knew something was wrong. She had maybe minutes before he came looking for her. Think. She needed to think. Valor had confessed to everything, the murders, the curse, killing his own brother, but she had no proof except her word against his. And who would the court believe? The king's trusted uncle, or the rejected Omega who'd been caught sneaking around in the middle of the night? The door flew open. Ravik stood there, his eyes blazing gold, his chest heaving. "What happened?" Lyra straightened, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Your uncle just tried to kill me, again." "Where?" The word came out as a growl. "The old dungeons. He was waiting for me." She touched her throat, already feeling the bruises forming. "He admitted everything, Ravik. The curse, the murders, your father." Ravik went very still. "My father? It wasn't an accident. Valor killed him, just like he's been killing you." For a moment, Ravik didn't move, didn't speak. Then something in his expression cracked, and the rage that surged up was so intense Lyra took an involuntary step back. "He's dead," Ravik said quietly. Too quietly. "I'm going to rip his throat out." "No!" Lyra grabbed his arm before he could turn. "That's exactly what he wants. You attack him without proof, the council turns against you. The kingdom tears itself apart. He wins." "I don't care." "Yes, you do." Lyra's voice rose. "You care about this kingdom, about the people who depend on you. You don't get to throw that away because you're angry." Ravik's hands were shaking. She could see him fighting for control, fighting the wolf that wanted blood. "Then what do you suggest?" "We expose him, in front of everyone. Tomorrow night, at the Winter Council meeting. We force him to show his hand." "How?" Ravik demanded. "You said it yourself. We have no proof." We have the bodies in the dungeons. We have Lord Tessian, Lord Merrick, Lady Ashford, all the nobles who supposedly left court. We bring the council down there. We make them see. Valor will just claim he didn't know they were there, that someone else must have put them there. Then we make him admit it, Lyra said. The curse is tied to him. I saw it in the dungeons. The shadow around you, it's the same shadow that clings to him. If we can prove that connection, how? Lyra took a breath. This was the part he wasn't going to like. The book in the library said the curse requires a willing sacrifice to break it. Someone has to take it into themselves long enough to sever the connection between the caster and the victim. Ravik's eyes narrowed. No. It's the only way. Absolutely not. Listen to me. I said no. Ravik's voice echoed through the room. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself for this. For me. It's not just for you, Lyra said quietly. It's for the kingdom. For everyone who'll die if Valor takes the throne. I don't care about the kingdom if you're dead. The words hung between them, raw and honest. Lyra felt the bond shudder, felt something inside her chest tighten painfully. You rejected me, remember? I know what I did. Ravik's voice was rough, and I've regretted it every moment since. Lyra stared at him. What? My wolf has been tearing me apart since you walked out of that hall. The bond. It's still there. Broken, maybe, but not gone. And every time I see you, every time you're in danger, it feels like something inside me is dying. He stepped closer, his hand coming up to touch her bruised throat, his fingers feather light. I can't lose you. You already did, Lyra whispered. You pushed me away. I was trying to protect you. From this. From all of it. From the curse that's killing me. Well, it didn't work. Lyra caught his hand, held it. I'm here anyway, and I'm not leaving until this is finished. Ravik's jaw clenched. You're the most stubborn, reckless, impossible woman I've ever met. Thank you. Despite everything, the corner of his mouth twitched. That wasn't a compliment. I'm taking it as one anyway. They stood there in the heavy silence, his hand still in hers, the bond humming between them like a half-healed wound. There has to be another way, Ravik said finally. If you think of one, I'm listening. He didn't answer, because they both knew there wasn't. The Winter Council meets tomorrow at sunset, Ravik said. If we're going to do this, we need to be ready. I'll be ready. Ravik looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just pulled her closer and rested his forehead against hers. Don't die, he said quietly. I'll do my best. He left a few minutes later, but Lyra could still feel him through the bond. His fear, his rage, his desperate need to protect her warring with the knowledge that he couldn't. She sat down at the desk and pulled out parchment. If tomorrow was going to work, she needed to plan every detail. Needed to anticipate every move Valor might make. She was still writing when Mira slipped into the room an hour later, soot-streaked and exhausted. The kitchens are a disaster, Mira said, collapsing into a chair. But the fire's out. Did you find what you needed? I found the bodies, Lyra said. And Valor. Mira went pale. He was down there? Waiting for me. He knew I'd come. Lyra set down her pen. He's planning something, Mira. Something big. He said Ravik will be dead within days. Can you stop it? I'm going to try. Mira studied her for a long moment. You're planning something too. Something dangerous. Very. Does the king know? Yes. And he agreed? Lyra smiled grimly. Not exactly, but he doesn't have a choice. Neither do you, apparently. Mira stood. Whatever you need, I'll help. I need you to stay safe, Lyra said. When this goes down tomorrow night, it's going to get ugly. Make sure you're nowhere near the council chamber. Where will you be? Right in the middle of it? The Winter Council meeting was held in the throne room instead of the smaller council chamber. Every noble family in the kingdom had representatives present, along with the military commanders, the trade guilds, and the High Elder. Hundreds of wolves packed into the massive space, all of them dressed in their finest, all of them watching. Lyra stood near the back, her heart pounding. She wore the midnight blue gown again, and she'd braided her hair in the traditional style of a wolf expecting battle. Ravik had sent her a dagger that morning, small enough to hide in her sleeve, sharp enough to do damage if needed. She hoped she wouldn't need it. Ravik sat on the throne, looking every inch the Alpha King. But Lyra could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the armrests. The curse was getting worse. The shadow around him was more visible now, even to those who didn't know to look for it. Valor stood at his right hand, playing his role perfectly. The concerned uncle. The faithful advisor. "My lords and ladies," Ravik began, his voice carrying across the hall. "We gather tonight to address concerns that have been brought to my attention. Concerns about the stability of this kingdom, about trust, about treason." The hall erupted in whispers. Valor's expression didn't change, but Lyra saw his eyes sharpen. "Recent events have made it clear that there are those among us who do not have this kingdom's best interests at heart," Ravik continued. 3 nobles have disappeared in the past 6 months. We were told they left court voluntarily. That was a lie. The whispers grew louder. "Their bodies were found yesterday," Ravik said, "in the old dungeons beneath the palace, murdered." Gasps echoed through the hall. Lady Marina's hand flew to her mouth. General Cade's expression darkened. "This is a serious accusation, Your Majesty," Lord Heron said from the front row. "Do you have proof?" "Yes." Ravik gestured, and 4 guards entered carrying something wrapped in white cloth. They laid the bundles on the floor before the throne and pulled back the coverings. The desiccated bodies of Lord Tessian, Lord Merrick, and Lady Ashford lay exposed for all to see. The hall erupted in chaos. "Silence!" Ravik's voice cracked like a whip. The alpha power in it forced everyone to stillness. "These nobles were murdered, and I intend to find out by whom." "Surely," Vialor said smoothly, stepping forward, "this is the work of an outsider, an enemy of the kingdom. We should increase security, investigate." "I already have," Ravik interrupted, "and the trail leads somewhere very close to home." Valor's expression flickered. "Your Majesty." "Tell them," Ravik said quietly. "Tell them what you did." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Ravik stood, and Lyra felt the rage radiating off him through the bond. "You've been poisoning me for months, slowly, using the old magic to drain my strength, my life, so you could take the throne." The hall went silent. "That's absurd," Valor said, but his voice had lost some of its smoothness. "Your Majesty, you're clearly unwell. Perhaps the strain of ruling, the strain of being cursed by my own uncle, you mean. You have no proof of this wild accusation." "Actually," Lyra said, stepping forward, "he does." Every eye in the hall turned to her. She walked down the center aisle, her chin high, ignoring the stares and whispers. She stopped in front of the throne and turned to face the crowd. "I've been researching the old magic," she said clearly, "the kind that allows one wolf to drain another. It requires sustained contact, trust, and it leaves a mark, a shadow that connects the victim to the caster." "A shadow no one else can see," Valor said dismissively. "How convenient." "Actually," Lyra said, turning to face him, "anyone with knowledge of the old ways can see it. High Elder, would you examine the king?" The High Elder, an ancient wolf with white hair and milky eyes, stepped forward slowly. She placed her gnarled hands on Ravik's temples and closed her eyes. The silence stretched. Then the elder's eyes snapped open, and she staggered back as if struck. "Corruption," she whispered. "Dark magic, wrapped around his soul like chains." The hall erupted again. "This proves nothing." Valor's voice rose. "Anyone could have cursed him. Any enemy." "The curse is tied to you," Lyra interrupted. "I saw it in the dungeons. The shadow around him matches the shadow around you." "You're lying." "Am I?" Lyra stepped closer to Valor. "Then let the elder examine you. If you're innocent, you have nothing to hide." Valor's mask slipped. Just for a second, but everyone saw it. The fury. The fear. "I am the king's uncle," he said coldly. "I will not be subjected to this humiliation based on the word of a rejected Omega." "Then you refuse," Ravik said quietly. "I refuse to dignify this farce." "Guards," Ravik said. "Restrain him." 4 guards moved forward, but Valor was faster. He raised his hand and the shadow around him surged outward like a living thing. The guards flew backward, crashing into the crowd. Screams filled the hall. "You stupid boy," Valor said, his voice no longer smooth but rough with power. "Did you really think you could challenge me? I've been planning this for decades, since before you were born. The shadow around him grew, spreading across the floor like oil. Wolves scrambled away from it, their eyes wide with terror. I should have killed you when I killed your father, Valor continued, turning to Ravik. But I wanted to watch you suffer first. Wanted to see you break, piece by piece, knowing you were too weak to stop me. You're insane, Ravik growled. I'm powerful. There's a difference. Valor's eyes went completely black. And now I'm going to finish what I started. He lunged for Ravik, moving with inhuman speed, but Lyra was faster. She threw herself between them, and Valor's hand, wreathed in shadow and dark magic, struck her full in the chest. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and all-consuming. She felt the curse tear into her, felt the shadow flood into her chest like ice water, felt it wrap around her heart and squeeze. She collapsed to the floor, gasping. Lyra! Ravik's roar shook the walls. Through the haze of agony, Lyra saw Ravik tackle Valor, saw them crash to the ground in a tangle of fists and fangs. The bond was screaming, Ravik's terror and rage pouring through it, but she also felt something else. The curse. Inside her now, connected to Valor through the strike he'd landed. This was it. The opening she needed. With shaking hands, she pulled the dagger from her sleeve and drove it into her own palm, drawing blood. The old magic responded to blood. The book had said so. She pressed her bleeding hand to her chest, right where the shadow had entered, and pulled. The curse resisted, fighting her, trying to burrow deeper. But Lyra held on. She was an Omega, yes, but she was also stubborn as hell, and she'd be damned if she let Valor win. She pulled harder. The shadow began to unravel, thread by thread, drawing out of her and back toward its source. But instead of returning to Valor, it began to dissolve, burning away in the presence of her blood, her will, her absolute refusal to die. Valor screamed. He threw Ravik off and stumbled backward, clutching his chest. The shadow around him was flickering, destabilizing. What are you doing? He snarled at Lyra. She looked up at him, blood dripping from her hand, pain etched across her face. Breaking your curse. You can't. It's impossible. Watch me. She pulled again, and this time the connection between Valor and Ravik snapped. Valor staggered, his eyes going wide. The shadow around him began to collapse inward, consuming itself. He clawed at his chest, but there was nothing he could do. The curse he'd spent years building, the power he'd stolen, all of it turned on him. His skin began to crack, light bleeding through the fissures. No? He whispered. No, this isn't. I'm supposed to. His words cut off as his body began to disintegrate, turning to ash from the inside out. The entire hall watched in horrified silence as Lord Valor Thornhale crumbled to dust. And then he was gone. Lyra collapsed fully, the dagger falling from her hand. The pain in her chest was unbearable. Like something vital had been ripped out. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world was going dark. Then Ravik was there, pulling her into his arms. Stay with me, he said, his voice breaking. Lyra, stay with me. She tried to speak, but blood bubbled up instead of words. Someone get a healer, Ravik roared. Now! The High Elder pushed through the crowd, her expression grim. She placed her hands on Lyra's chest and closed her eyes. The curse is gone, she said. But she took too much of it into herself. It's burned through her, damaged her from within. Fix it, Ravik demanded. I can't. This kind of magic, there's no healing it. Not with herbs or spells. There has to be something. There is, the Elder said quietly. The bond. It's still there, isn't it? Broken, but not severed. Ravik's arms tightened around Lyra. Yes. Then complete it. Give her your strength, your life force. It may be enough to heal what the curse destroyed. Do it, Ravik said without hesitation. The Elder's eyes widened. Your Majesty, you don't understand. The bond works both ways. If you give her your strength and she still dies, you'll die with her. I don't care. Do it. The Elder hesitated, then nodded. She took Ravik's hand and placed it over Lyra's heart, then placed Lyra's bloody hand over his. Speak the words, the Elder said. Claim her as your mate. Truly this time. Ravik looked down at Lyra, his eyes fierce and desperate. I, Ravik Thornhale, claim you as my mate, my equal, my queen, from this moment until my last breath. The bond blazed to life. Lyra gasped as power flooded into her. Ravik's strength, his wolf, his very essence pouring through the connection they shared. It burned, but it was a clean burn, not the corrupting agony of Valor's curse. The pain in her chest began to ease. Her breathing steadied. The darkness receded. She opened her eyes and found Ravik staring down at her, his face pale but relieved. "You're an idiot," she croaked. He laughed, a broken, desperate sound. "You're one to talk. You threw yourself in front of a curse. Seemed like a good idea at the time. It was insane. Worked, though." Ravik pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair. "Don't ever do that again." No promises. Around them, the hall was in chaos. Nobles were shouting, guards were trying to restore order, and General Cade was barking commands. But Ravik and Lyra stayed where they were, holding each other, the bond finally whole and singing between them. The High Elder cleared her throat. "Your Majesty, the court will need guidance, leadership." Ravik looked up, his arm still around Lyra. "Then they'll have it." He stood, helping Lyra to her feet. She swayed slightly, but he steadied her. Together, they turned to face the court. "Valor Thornhale is dead," Ravik said, his voice carrying across the hall. "His crimes have been exposed, his corruption purged, and his attempt to destroy this kingdom has failed." The hall slowly quieted. "There will be an investigation into everyone who aided him," Ravik continued. "Every conspirator will be found and brought to justice. This kingdom will be cleansed of the rot that nearly destroyed it." He paused, then looked down at Lyra. "And from this day forward, Lyra Ashen is my mate, my queen. Anyone who challenges that challenges me." The hall erupted in whispers again, but this time there was something different in the sound. Not just shock, respect, maybe even a little fear. Because they'd all just watched an Omega destroy one of the most powerful wolves in the kingdom, and they'd watched their king claim her without hesitation. Lady Marina looked like she'd swallowed something bitter, but she bowed her head in acknowledgement. General Cade smiled, an actual smile, and the High Elder inclined her head in approval. One by one, the court bowed. Lyra stood there, exhausted and bloodied and barely able to stand, and watched as an entire kingdom bent the knee, not to her, to them, to what they'd become together. Ravik's hand found hers and squeezed. She squeezed back. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Later that night, after the healers had tended to both of them, after the guards had started their investigation, after the chaos had finally died down, Lyra stood in Ravik's chambers, her chambers now, she supposed, and looked out at the city below. The winter moon hung high and bright, casting silver light across the rooftops. Ravik came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That a week ago you rejected me in front of this entire kingdom." "I know, and now I'm your queen." "I know that too." Lyra leaned back against him. "Life is strange." "That's one word for it." His arms tightened. "Are you okay?" "Really?" "I'm alive. That's more than I expected 12 hours ago." "Don't joke about that." "Who's joking?" She turned in his arms to face him. "I nearly died, Ravik. We both know it." "But you didn't." His hand came up to cup her face. "You're here. You're alive, and you're mine." Possessive. Completely. He leaned down and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper, the bond humming between them. When they finally broke apart, Lyra rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Ravik smiled. "Now we rebuild. Clean out the corruption. Fix what Valor broke. Together." "Together," Lyra echoed. Outside, the city slept, unaware that their kingdom had just been saved by an Omega everyone had dismissed and a king everyone had thought was dying. But morning would come, and with it, a new beginning. Morning came with snow. Lyra woke to white flakes drifting past the windows, and Ravik's arm heavy across her waist. For a moment she just lay there, listening to his breathing, feeling the bond hum steady and whole between them. No shadow, no curse. Just them. Then reality crashed back in. and she remembered everything that still needed to be done. She slipped out of bed carefully, trying not to wake him, but his eyes opened immediately. Gold instead of gray, his wolf was still close to the surface. "Where are you going?" His voice was rough with sleep. "The council chamber. We have work to do." Ravik sat up, running a hand through his hair. "The investigation can wait a few hours." "No, it can't." Lyra pulled on a robe, deep crimson silk that Ravik had insisted she take from the royal wardrobe. "Valor's allies are still out there. They'll be scrambling to cover their tracks. We need to move fast." "You nearly died last night." "But I didn't." She turned to face him. "And I'm not going to waste the second chance we fought for." Ravik studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Give me 5 minutes to get dressed." "You don't have to." "We do this together, remember?" The bond warmed at his words, and despite everything, Lyra smiled. Together. 20 minutes later, they walked into the council chamber side by side. General Cade was already there, along with the High Elder and 4 other council members who'd proven their loyalty the night before. Maps and documents covered the table. "Your Majesty," Cade said, standing. Then his eyes flicked to Lyra, and he inclined his head. "Your Majesty." The title felt strange, wrong almost, but Lyra lifted her chin and took the seat beside Ravik without hesitation. If she was going to be queen, she'd have to get used to it. "What have we found?" Ravik asked. Cade gestured to the documents. "Valor kept detailed records, obsessively detailed. We found them in a hidden safe in his study. Financial transactions, correspondence, names of everyone who aided him or took bribes." "How many?" Lyra asked. 17 nobles, 5 military officers, 3 members of the Merchant Council. Cade's expression was grim. "And Lady Marina." Ravik's jaw tightened. "She knew?" "Not about the curse, but she took gold to spread rumors, to undermine you in court. She's been working against you for months." "Arrest her," Ravik said, "along with everyone else on that list." "Already done, Your Majesty. They're being held in the main dungeons pending trial." "What about the outer territories?" Lyra asked. "Valor had influence beyond the capital. There could be more we haven't found." The High Elder leaned forward, her milky eyes somehow still piercing. "The girl speaks wisely. Corruption like this doesn't grow in isolation. It spreads, infects." "Then we root it out," Ravik said. "All of it. I want investigators sent to every major settlement. Anyone who worked with Valor answers for it." "That will take months," one of the council members, Lord Heron, said carefully, "and it will destabilize the kingdom further. Perhaps we should focus on the capital first." "No." Lyra's voice was quiet but firm. Everyone turned to look at her. "If we only clean the surface, the rot will spread again. We need to be thorough, even if it's hard, even if it takes time." Lord Heron's expression tightened. "With respect, Your Majesty, you've been here less than a week. You don't understand the delicate balance." "I understand," Lyra interrupted, "that the delicate balance you're talking about is the same one that let Valor murder 3 nobles and slowly kill the king without anyone noticing. So maybe it's time for a different approach." Silence fell over the room. Lord Heron's face flushed, but he didn't argue. Couldn't, really. Not when she was right. Ravik's hand found hers under the table and squeezed. "We do it Lyra's way," he said. "Thorough, complete. No compromises." Cade nodded approvingly. "I'll send the orders today." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, going over details, assigning responsibilities, planning the trials that would have to be held for Valor's conspirators. It was exhausting work, and by the time they finished, Lyra's head was pounding. But it was progress, real progress. As the council members filed out, Cade lingered. "Your Majesty," he said to Lyra, "may I speak freely?" "Always." "What you did last night, taking the curse into yourself, that took more courage than I've seen in any warrior. You have my respect and my loyalty." Lyra felt her throat tighten. "Thank you, General." "Cade, just Cade." He smiled, a rare expression on his scarred face. "We're going to need that courage in the days ahead. The kingdom is wounded. Healing won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing is," Lyra said. After he left, Ravik pulled her close. "You're winning them over. One at a time, apparently.
That's how it works. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You're going to be good at this. At what, being queen? Lyra shook her head. I don't know the first thing about running a kingdom. Neither did I when I took the throne. We'll figure it out together. That word again, together. It was starting to feel less like a promise and more like a lifeline. A knock on the door interrupted them. Mira poked her head in, her expression worried. Your Majesty, both of you. There's a situation in the Great Hall. The families of the arrested nobles are demanding an audience. Ravik's expression hardened. How many? Maybe 50. And they're angry. Of course they were. Lyra straightened, smoothing her dress. Then we should go talk to them. Lyra, they deserve answers, Ravik. Their family members were arrested in the middle of the night. They're scared and confused. We need to face them. She's right, Mira said quietly. If you don't, the rumors will get worse. Ravik looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. Fine, but we do this carefully. The Great Hall was packed with angry, frightened wolves. They fell silent when Ravik and Lyra entered, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Lyra could feel their eyes on her, judging, measuring, wondering if the Omega who destroyed Valor was someone to fear or someone to follow. Ravik took his place on the throne. Lyra stood beside him, refusing to sit in the smaller chair that tradition dictated for a consort. If she was going to be queen, she'd stand as an equal. You have questions, Ravik said, his voice carrying across the hall. I'll answer them. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, middle-aged, dressed in expensive silk, her face tight with fury. You arrested my husband in the middle of the night. No charges, no trial. Just guards dragging him from his bed. What kind of king does that? The kind who found evidence that your husband took bribes from a traitor, Ravik said flatly. The kind who's tired of watching corruption destroy this kingdom from within. Evidence? What evidence? Financial records, letters, signed confessions from other conspirators. Ravik's gaze swept the crowd. Your husband wasn't the only one. 17 nobles, 5 officers, and 3 merchants all aided Lord Valor in his attempt to seize the throne. They all knew what he was doing, and they all profited from it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My brother would never... Another voice called out. Your brother accepted 10,000 gold crowns to vote against trade reforms that would have helped the outer territories, Lyra said, stepping forward. The crowd's attention shifted to her. He put gold in his pocket while people starved. That's treason. And who are you to make that judgment? The woman demanded. You're nobody. An Omega from a family with no power, no standing. I'm the woman who saved your king's life, Lyra said quietly. And I'm the woman who's going to make sure this kingdom never falls to corruption again, whether you like it or not. The woman's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. An older man pushed forward. What will happen to them? To our families? There will be trials, Ravik said. Fair trials. Those who aided Valor knowingly will face justice. Those who were coerced or misled will be given the chance to prove their innocence. And if they're found guilty, the man pressed, they'll lose their titles, their lands, possibly their lives, depending on the severity of their crimes. Ravik's voice was iron. This kingdom has been poisoned. I'm cutting out the infection, even if it hurts. The crowd erupted in angry shouts, some demanding mercy, others demanding their family members be released immediately, a few calling for Ravik to step down if he couldn't rule without becoming a tyrant. Lyra felt Ravik tense beside her, felt his wolf rising in response to the challenge. She put a hand on his arm. Let me. He looked at her, surprised, but nodded. Lyra stepped forward, and her voice cut through the chaos. Enough. The hall fell silent. You're angry, she said. I understand that. You're scared for your families. I understand that too. But listen to what you're asking. You want us to ignore treason, to let corruption slide because it's inconvenient to punish it, to pretend the last 6 months didn't happen. She paused, letting the words sink in. Lord Valor murdered the previous king. He murdered 3 nobles. He cursed Ravik, tried to kill him slowly so he could take the throne, and 17 of your family members helped him. They knew. They took his gold. They looked the other way while people died. Her voice dropped, but it still carried. If we let that stand, if we show mercy to traitors, what kind of kingdom are we? What kind of future are we building?
Silence. The trials will be fair, Lyra continued. Evidence will be presented. Your families will have the chance to defend themselves. But there will be consequences for treason. There have to be. Because the alternative is chaos. She looked around the hall, meeting as many eyes as she could. This kingdom nearly fell. You all saw what happened last night. You saw Violor's power, his corruption, and you saw it destroyed. Not by armies, not by magic, but by the truth. She gestured to Ravik. Your king fought to save this kingdom even while it was killing him. He deserves better than this. We all do. The silence stretched. Then, slowly, a woman in the back bowed her head. Then another. Then the older man who'd asked about the trials. One by one, the crowd settled. Not happy, not satisfied, but willing to listen. Ravik stood and moved to stand beside Lyra. The trials begin in 3 days. You're all welcome to attend. See the evidence for yourselves. Make your own judgments. He paused. But know this. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm telling you how this will go. This kingdom will be cleansed, and it starts now. The crowd dispersed slowly, still muttering, still angry. But the fire had gone out of them. As the last of them filed out, Lyra let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That, Ravik said quietly, was incredible. That was terrifying. You didn't show it. He pulled her into his arms. You sounded like a queen. I sounded like someone trying very hard not to panic. Same thing, apparently. Despite herself, Lyra laughed. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly. We survived another day. Barely. I'll take it. Over the next 3 days, the kingdom held its breath. The trials were scheduled, the evidence was compiled, and slowly, grudgingly, the truth came out. Lord Tessian's family wept when they saw the proof of his murder. Lady Ashford's son demanded Valor's head until someone reminded him Valor was already Ash. Lord Merrick's widow stood in the council chamber and told everyone exactly what her husband had suspected about Valor before he disappeared. The 17 arrested nobles went on trial, and the evidence was damning. Financial records, letters in their own handwriting, testimony from servants who'd overheard conversations. Some broke down and confessed. Others maintained their innocence to the bitter end. But the outcome was the same. Guilty. 12 were stripped of their titles and exiled. 3 were executed for direct involvement in the murders. 2 were given reduced sentences when it became clear they'd been coerced. Lady Marina was the last to be tried. She walked into the council chamber in chains, her expensive silks replaced with rough prison clothes. But her head was still high, her expression still defiant. Lady Marina, Ravik said from the throne, you stand accused of conspiracy against the crown, accepting bribes, and using your position to spread false information designed to undermine the king's authority. How do you plead? Not guilty. Her voice was steady. The evidence says otherwise. Cade stepped forward with a stack of papers. These are letters between you and Lord Valor. In them, you discuss payment for services rendered, specifically spreading rumors that the king was unfit to rule. I was trying to protect the kingdom, Marina said. Ravik was clearly unwell. Someone needed to act. By taking gold from the man who was killing him? Lyra asked quietly. Marina's gaze snapped to her. You know nothing about running a kingdom, about the sacrifices required. I did what I thought was necessary. You did what you were paid to do, Lyra corrected. There's a difference. Marina's mask cracked. You think you're better than me? You're nobody, an Omega who got lucky. You don't belong on that throne. And yet here I am. Lyra stood and walked down to stand in front of Marina. I could have you executed for what you did. The law allows it. Fear flickered across Marina's face. But I'm not going to, Lyra continued, because I'm not interested in revenge. I'm interested in justice. She turned to Ravik. I recommend exile, stripped of title and lands. She can live, but not here. Ravik studied Marina for a long moment, then nodded. So ordered. Lady Marina, you have until sunset to leave the kingdom. If you return, the sentence will be death. Marina's face went white, but she said nothing as the guards led her away. After the chamber cleared, Ravik looked at Lyra with something like wonder. You could have had her killed. I know.
Why didn't you? Because, Lyra said, we're trying to build something better, and that starts with being better. Ravik pulled her close and kissed her forehead. You're going to make a hell of a queen. I'm still figuring out what that means. So am I. He smiled. But we've got time. That night, the palace held a formal dinner to mark the end of the trials.
It wasn't a celebration, too many families were grieving, too many wounds were still raw, but it was a step forward. Lyra wore a gown of midnight blue and silver, her hair braided with pearls. Ravik wore the formal regalia of the Alpha King, and together they looked every inch the rulers they were becoming. The hall was packed with nobles who'd proven their loyalty, military leaders, representatives from the outer territories. The atmosphere was cautious but hopeful. General Cade stood and raised his glass. To the king and queen, may they lead us into a better future. To the king and queen, the hall echoed. Lyra felt the weight of every eye on her, felt the responsibility of what they'd just taken on. But when she looked at Ravik, saw the strength in his eyes and the bond humming steady between them, she didn't feel afraid. She felt ready. The dinner progressed with speeches and toasts. Lords and ladies who'd once looked at Lyra with contempt now bowed respectfully. Servants who'd whispered about her now smiled. It wasn't perfect. There were still those who resented her, who thought she'd risen too far too fast. But the tide had turned. Near the end of the evening, the High Elder approached their table. Your Majesties, might I have a word? They followed her to a quiet corner of the hall. The old magic has been watching, the Elder said cryptically. It approves of what you've done. The sacrifice you made, Lyra, to break the curse, it's created a bond stronger than any I've seen in generations. What does that mean? Lyra asked. It means, the Elder said, that you two are tied together now in ways that go beyond the normal mate bond. Your strengths feed each other, your weaknesses too. Where one falters, the other will hold steady. Ravik's hand found Lyra's. We've already figured that out. The Elder smiled. Good. You'll need it for what's coming. What's coming? Lyra's pulse quickened. Rebuilding is harder than destroying. You've cut out the infection, but the kingdom is still wounded. There will be those who resist the changes you're making, those who preferred the old ways, even if they were corrupt. We'll handle it, Ravik said. I believe you will. The Elder inclined her head. You've proven yourselves already. But stay vigilant. Power attracts those who crave it, always. After she left, Lyra looked up at Ravik. She's not wrong. This isn't over. No, but we've won the first battle. He pulled her closer. And we'll win the rest. The evening ended with music and dancing. Lyra had never been much for formal dances, but Ravik led her onto the floor anyway, and they moved through the steps with the entire court watching. You're getting better at this, Ravik murmured. At dancing? At being queen, Lyra smiled. I'm still winging it. Aren't we all? When the dance ended, the hall erupted in applause. Not polite, obligatory applause, real appreciation. Lyra looked around at the faces, some still wary, some genuinely warm, all of them watching to see what she'd do next. She'd gone from rejected Omega to queen in less than 2 weeks. It should have been impossible. But then again, so was destroying an ancient curse with nothing but stubbornness and a bleeding palm. As they left the hall that night, Mira caught up to them in the corridor. Your Majesties, she said, slightly out of breath, I thought you should know. The outer territories have been sending ravens all day. They're asking about you, Lyra, about the Omega who saved the king. What are they saying? Lyra asked. Mira smiled. That maybe things are finally changing, that maybe someone from the outer territories can make a difference after all. Lyra felt something tight in her chest loosen. Tell them I haven't forgotten where I came from, and I won't. I will. Mira hesitated. For what it's worth, I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you fought. So am I. After Mira left, Ravik led Lyra to the balcony overlooking the city. The snow had stopped, and the sky was clear, stars glittering like ice. Do you ever regret it? Lyra asked quietly. Claiming me as your mate, taking on everything that came with it. Ravik turned her to face him, his hands framing her face. Never. Not for a second. Even though I've caused nothing but chaos since I got here? Especially because of that. He smiled. You challenged me, fought me, refused to let me die even when I'd pushed you away. You saved this kingdom, Lyra, and you saved me. We saved each other. Yeah. He kissed her softly. We did. They stood there in the cold, wrapped in each other in the bond that had been broken and rebuilt stronger than before. Below them, the city spread out in all directions. Lights flickered in windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. Life continued, as it always did. But it was different now. The corruption had been cut out. The curse was broken. And two wolves who should never have been mates were standing on a balcony, looking out at a kingdom they'd fought to save. What happens tomorrow? Lyra asked. Tomorrow, Ravik said, we start rebuilding. For real this time. New laws, better trade, support for the outer territories, everything Valor tried to prevent. That's going to make a lot of powerful people unhappy. Good. Let them be unhappy. His eyes glinted. We didn't fight this hard just to maintain the status quo. Lyra laughed despite herself. You're starting to sound like me. I'll take that as a compliment. It was. They stayed on the balcony until the cold drove them inside, talking about plans and possibilities, and the future they were going to build together. It wouldn't be easy. The elder was right. Rebuilding was harder than destroying, but for the first time since Lyra had walked into that grand hall and heard Ravik reject her, she felt something like hope. Not the desperate, clawing hope of survival, but the steady, solid hope of knowing that what they were building would last. The kingdom had been saved. Now came the hard part, making it worth saving. Making it worth saving turned out to be exactly as hard as Lyra had expected. The first challenge came 3 weeks after Vylor's death, when representatives from the northern territories arrived at court demanding to be heard. They'd traveled through winter storms to get there, and they weren't in the mood for diplomatic niceties. Lyra was in the council chamber reviewing grain distribution reports, when the doors slammed open and 5 wolves strode in, all of them looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The leader, a woman with gray-streaked hair and a scar running down her left cheek, stopped in front of the table and crossed her arms. We need to speak with the king, she said flatly. Lyra set down her quill. The king is meeting with the trade guilds. I'm Queen Lyra. Whatever you need to say, you can say to me. The woman's eyes narrowed. You're the Omega from the Ashen Line. I am. The one who destroyed Valor. Also me. The woman studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to some decision. She pulled out a chair and sat down without asking permission. The others followed suit. I'm Chief Kara of the Wolfpine clan, the woman said. These are my advisors. We've come because we're tired of being ignored. Lyra leaned back in her chair. Ignored how? The Northern Territories have been asking for aid for 3 years. Road repairs, healers. Military support to deal with the raiders coming across the border. Every request gets denied. Every petition disappears into the capital and we never hear back. That was Valor's doing, Lyra said quietly. He wanted the outer territories weak, dependent, easy to control. We know that now, Kara said. Question is, what are you going to do about it? Fix it, Lyra said simply. What do you need? Kara blinked, clearly thrown by the direct answer. Just like that? You're going to help? Just like that. Give me a list of what you need most urgently. I'll make sure it happens. Why? One of Kara's advisors asked suspiciously. What do you get out of it? A stronger kingdom, Lyra said, and the knowledge that I'm not leaving people to suffer when I can help them. Kara exchanged glances with her advisors, then pulled out a rolled parchment from her pack. We made a list. Didn't think anyone would actually read it, but we made it anyway. Lyra took the parchment and unrolled it. The list was long. Road repairs, medical supplies, food stores for the winter, weapons to defend against raiders, skilled craftsmen to help rebuild damaged infrastructure. It was also completely reasonable. This is doable, Lyra said. Most of it can start within the month. The roads will take longer. We'll need to wait for spring thaw. But everything else, we can begin immediately. Kara stared at her. You're serious? Completely. Why should we believe you? The suspicious advisor pressed. The capital has been making promises for years and delivering nothing. Because, a voice said from the doorway, she's not the capital. She's one of you. Ravik entered the chamber, and the northern wolves immediately stood and bowed. He waved them back to their seats. Chief Kara,
Ravik said, nodding respectfully. I heard you were here. I'm glad.
Your Majesty,
Kara said carefully. We didn't mean to bypass you. You didn't. My queen speaks with my full authority. Ravik moved to stand behind Lyra's chair, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. Whatever she's promised, consider it done. Kara looked between them, her expression shifting from suspicion to something like cautious hope. The rumors are true, then. Things really are changing. They are, Ravik said, but it's going to take time.
And it's going to take all of us working together. The Northern Territories will hold up our end, Kara said. If you hold up yours, we will, Lyra promised. After the Northern Wolves left, Ravik pulled Lyra into his arms. You know we're going to have delegations from every territory showing up now, right? Everyone's going to want to see if the new queen really keeps her promises. Good, Lyra said. Let them come. Let them see. You're enjoying this. I'm enjoying being useful. There's a difference. Ravik laughed and kissed the top of her head. Come on, the Trade Guild meeting is about to start, and they're even more stubborn than the Northern Territories. He wasn't wrong. The trade guilds had been operating under a system that heavily favored the capital for decades. Changing that meant renegotiating contracts, adjusting tariffs, and generally upending everything they'd built their businesses on. They were not happy. You're asking us to take a loss, one of the guild masters, a portly wolf named Darren, said, his face red with anger. These new trade routes you're proposing will cut into our profits by 30%. They'll also open up markets in the outer territories that have never had access to your goods before, Lyra countered. Your initial profits might drop, but your overall market will triple. Long-term, you'll make more. Long-term doesn't pay our workers now, another guildmaster snapped. Which is why we're offering tax incentives for the first 2 years, Ravik said, to offset the initial losses. After that, you'll be profitable again. More profitable than you are now. The guildmasters grumbled, but Lyra could see them calculating, considering. What about the outer territories? Darren asked. They can't afford our goods. We'll be shipping product to people who can't pay for it. Actually, Lyra said, pulling out a report she'd been working on for days, the outer territories have resources the capital desperately needs. Timber, iron ore, medicinal herbs that only grow in the northern forests. If we establish proper trade routes, they'll have income. And with income comes purchasing power. She slid the report across the table. I've outlined a 3-year plan. Year 1, we focus on infrastructure, getting the roads built, establishing trade posts. Year 2, we start moving goods both ways. Year 3, the system should be self-sustaining. Darren picked up the report and started reading. His expression slowly shifted from hostility to genuine interest. This might actually work, he said grudgingly. It will work, Lyra said, but only if everyone commits to it. Half measures won't cut it. The meeting went on for another 2 hours, but by the end they had agreements in principle from all the major guilds. It wasn't perfect, and there would be more negotiations to come, but it was a start. As the guild masters filed out, Darren paused beside Lyra's chair. Your Majesty, he said quietly, I'll admit, I wasn't sure about you when you first showed up. Thought you were just some pretty face the king got stuck with. I was wrong. You know what you're doing. I'm figuring it out as I go, Lyra admitted. Aren't we all? Darren smiled. But you're doing it well. Keep it up. After he left, Lyra slumped in her chair, exhausted. That, Ravik said, was impressive. That was terrifying. I have no idea if that plan will actually work. It will. You did the research. You ran the numbers. He pulled her to her feet. And you convinced a room full of greedy merchants to think beyond their immediate profits. That's no small feat. I just told them the truth, which is more than anyone else has done in years. Ravik cupped her face. You're changing things, Lyra. Real things. People are noticing. Some people still hate me. Some people always will. That's not the point. The point is more people are starting to believe. In you. In us. In the possibility that things can actually get better. Lyra leaned into his touch, letting herself draw strength from the bond between them. It's only been a month. We have so much more to do. Then we'll do it, one day at a time. The days blurred together after that. More delegations, more meetings, More late nights poring over reports and maps and budgets. Lyra threw herself into the work, learning everything she could about trade and taxes and infrastructure and law. Ravik was right beside her the entire time, sharing the burden, making decisions together. But the real test came 2 months after Vaelor's death, when a messenger arrived from the eastern marches with news that sent the entire court into chaos.
Raiders, General Cade said grimly, spreading a map across the council table. A war band at least 300 strong. They've already burned 2 villages and are heading toward the main settlement at Greystone. 300? Ravik's hands clenched into fists. That's not a raiding party. That's an invasion force. They're testing us, Lyra said quietly. Word's gotten out about the instability here, about Vaelor's death and the trials. They think we're weak. Then we prove them wrong, Ravik said. Cade, gather the army. We march in the morning. Wait, Lyra said. If you take the army to the eastern marches, you leave the capital vulnerable. What if this is a diversion? What if there are more enemies waiting for you to leave? Ravik paused. What do you suggest? Send half the army. Keep the other half here to defend the capital. Lyra looked at Cade. Can we win with half? Depends on the terrain, the intelligence we have. But Cade studied the map. If we're smart about it, yes. But it'll be riskier. Everything we do is risky, Ravik said. Lyra's right. We can't leave the capital undefended. We send half. I'll lead them personally. No, Lyra said. Ravik turned to her, surprised. What? You're the king. If you fall in battle, the kingdom falls apart. We just barely survived 1 succession crisis. We can't risk another. She looked at Cade. The general leads the army. You stay here. Lyra... I'm not debating this, she said firmly. Cade is the best military commander we have. Let him do his job. Ravik looked like he wanted to argue, but Cade spoke first. She's right, Your Majesty. Your place is here. Mine is on the battlefield. Ravik's jaw worked, but finally he nodded. Fine, but I want daily reports, and if anything goes wrong, I'll send word immediately, Cade promised. The army marched out 3 days later. Lyra stood on the walls with Ravik and watched them go, 2,000 wolves heading east to defend the border. I should be with them, Ravik said quietly. You're exactly where you need to be. Lyra took his hand. Trust Cade. Trust the plan. I do. Doesn't make it easier. The waiting was agony. Days crawled by with no word except brief reports that the army was making good progress. Then, a week after they'd left, a rider arrived bearing news. We engaged the raiders at Greystone Pass, the messenger reported, exhausted and bloodied but grinning. General Cade used the terrain to his advantage, trapped them in the valley, and cut off their retreat. We lost maybe 50 wolves. They lost over 200. The rest surrendered or fled. Relief crashed over Lyra so hard her knees nearly buckled. And Cade? Wounded but alive. He sends word that the eastern marches are secure and the army will return within the week. Ravik closed his eyes briefly, and Lyra felt his relief through the bond. Send word back. Tell Cade he has my gratitude and my respect. When the army returned, the entire capital turned out to welcome them. Cade rode at the front, his arm in a sling but his head high. The soldiers behind him were exhausted but victorious. Ravik met them at the gates and pulled Cade into a rough embrace. Well done. Just doing my job, Your Majesty. Cade smiled tiredly. Though I'll admit it's easier when the Queen makes sure we're not spread too thin. That was all her, Ravik said, glancing at Lyra. Cade turned to her and bowed, a full formal bow of respect. Your Majesty, your tactical advice saved lives. Thank you. Lyra felt her throat tighten. I'm just glad it worked. It did more than work. It sent a message. Cade straightened. Word's already spreading. The new rulers of Thornvale aren't weak. They're smart, strategic, willing to make hard choices. Let's hope it's enough to discourage future invasions, Lyra said. It will be. For a while, at least. That night, the palace held a feast to celebrate the victory. It was smaller than the formal dinners Lyra was getting used to, but warmer somehow. More genuine. Soldiers told stories of the battle. Families reunited with loved ones who'd returned safely. And through it all, Lyra felt the shift happening.
The court wasn't just tolerating her anymore. They were accepting her. As the evening wore on, the High Elder approached once again, her expression pleased. "The kingdom is healing," she said without preamble, "faster than I expected." "We've had help," Lyra said. "You've had each other." The Elder's milky eyes somehow still saw everything. "That's what makes the difference. A king alone can be powerful. A queen alone can be wise. But together, you're unstoppable." "We're still figuring things out," Ravik said, "as you should be. Leadership isn't something you master. It's something you practice. Every day. For the rest of your lives." The Elder smiled. "But you're doing well. Better than well. The old magic is pleased." After she left, Lyra turned to Ravik. "Do you think we're actually doing this? Actually rebuilding the kingdom?" "I think," Ravik said, pulling her close, "that we're trying, and sometimes that's enough." "Is it?" "Look around." Ravik gestured to the hall. 2 months ago, these people were terrified. The kingdom was falling apart. Now they're celebrating, planning for the future, believing things can get better. Because we got lucky. No, because we fought for it. Because you refused to give up even when everyone expected you to. He kissed her softly. "You changed everything, Lyra. Don't downplay that." "We changed everything," she corrected. "Together." "Together," he agreed. The months that followed were exhausting but rewarding. The Northern Territories got their aid and roads started being built as soon as spring arrived. The trade routes opened, and after some initial struggles, goods began flowing both ways. The Outer Territories started sending timber and ore to the capital. The capital sent manufactured goods and medicines back. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, disagreements, moments when Lyra wanted to scream in frustration. But slowly, steadily, things improved. 6 months after Veilor's death, Chief Kara returned to the capital with news that the first roads were complete and trade was flowing. She brought gifts, furs and preserved meats, and hand-carved wooden figures that the northern artisans were famous for. For the queen who kept her word, Kara said, presenting them with a formality that still felt strange to Lyra. "I told you I would," Lyra said. "A lot of people tell us things. You're the first one who actually followed through." Kara smiled. "The North remembers that. You ever need anything from us, you ask? We'll answer." After Kara left, Ravik pulled Lyra into his study and shut the door. "What's wrong?" Lyra asked, noting his expression. "Nothing's wrong. I just wanted to give you this." He handed her a small wooden box. Lyra opened it to find a ring inside, silver, with a moonstone set in the center. Simple, but beautiful. "It was my mother's," Ravik said quietly. "She died when I was young, but my father always said she was the strongest woman he ever knew. I think she would have liked you." Lyra's vision blurred. "Ravik?" "We never had a proper ceremony," he continued. "Everything happened so fast, but I wanted you to have this. Wanted you to know that you're not just my mate. You're my partner, my equal, my queen." Lyra slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "Thank you." "Thank you," Ravik said, "for staying, for fighting, for refusing to give up on me even when I'd given up on myself." "I never gave up on you." "I know. That's what saved me." They stood there in the quiet of the study, holding each other, the bond between them singing with something that felt like peace. A year after Veilor's death, the kingdom held a formal coronation ceremony, not for Ravik, he'd already been crowned years ago, but for Lyra. The grand hall was packed with wolves from every corner of the kingdom. The northern territories sent representatives. The eastern marches sent soldiers. The trade guilds sent their masters. Even the outer territories that had been ignored for decades sent delegates to witness the ceremony. Lyra stood before the throne in a gown of silver and blue, her hair braided with pearls and moonstones. The High Elder held the crown, delicate silver worked to look like wolves running through a forest. "Lyra Ashen," the Elder said, her voice carrying across the hall, "you came to this court as an Omega with no power, no title, no claim to anything except the bond you shared with the king." Lyra met the Elder's milky gaze steadily. "You were rejected," the Elder continued, "cast aside, expected to break. But you didn't. You stood. You fought. You saved not just the king, but the entire kingdom." The Elder raised the crown. By the authority of the old magic, and with the blessing of this court, I name you Queen of Thornvale, protector of the realm, voice of the people, partner to the king." She placed the crown on Lyra's head. The hall erupted in applause. Lyra turned to face the crowd, and for a moment she couldn't quite believe this was real, that she, an Omega from the Outer Territories who'd been publicly rejected barely a year ago, was standing here wearing a crown. But then she saw the faces looking back at her, not with contempt, not with pity, with respect, with hope, with belief. Ravik stepped forward and took her hand, and together they faced the kingdom they'd fought to save. "Long live the Queen!" someone shouted. "Long live the King and Queen!" the hall echoed. The celebration lasted late into the night, music and dancing and toasts and speeches. Lyra's feet hurt, and her face was tired from smiling, but she wouldn't have changed a moment of it. Near midnight, she and Ravik slipped away to the balcony overlooking the city, the same balcony where they'd stood months ago, talking about rebuilding. "We did it," Lyra said softly. "We're still doing it," Ravik corrected. "This is just the beginning." "I know, but we've come so far already." She leaned against him. "A year ago you rejected me in front of the entire court. Now we're ruling together." "Best decision I ever made," Ravik said. Lyra laughed. "Rejecting me?" "No, letting you stay, letting you fight, letting you prove me wrong about everything." "You didn't let me do anything. I just did it." "Yeah, you did." He turned her to face him. "I love you, you know that?" It was the first time either of them had said it out loud. The bond had been singing it for months, but hearing the words made Lyra's chest tighten. "I love you too," she whispered. Ravik kissed her, and for a moment everything else fell away. The kingdom, the responsibilities, the weight of the crowns they wore. It was just them, two wolves who'd found each other in the middle of chaos and refused to let go. When they finally pulled apart, Lyra looked out at the city spread below them. Lights flickered in windows, smoke rose from chimneys. People lived their lives, unaware that the two wolves standing on this balcony had fought and bled and nearly died to give them a better future. But that was okay. They didn't need to know the details. They just needed to live, to thrive, to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. "What are you thinking?" Ravik asked. "That we have a lot more work to do," Lyra said. "Always. But that it's worth it." "Always," Ravik repeated, squeezing her hand. Below them, the city slept, dreaming of futures that were finally possible. Above them, the moon hung bright and full, blessing the kingdom it had almost lost. And on the balcony, two wolves, a king and a queen, rejected and reforged, stood together. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole, and ready for whatever came next. The kingdom had been saved not by power or magic or destiny, but by something simpler, something stronger, by two people who'd refused to give up on each other, even when the entire world said they should, by a bond that had been broken and rebuilt, by love that had been tested and proven true. Lyra Ashen had walked into that grand hall a year ago expecting to be destroyed. Instead, she'd become a queen. And Ravik Thornhale had rejected his fated mate expecting to protect her from his curse. Instead, she'd saved his life. Together, they'd torn down corruption, exposed treason, and rebuilt a kingdom from the ashes. And they weren't done yet, not by a long shot. But as they stood there in the moonlight, holding each other and looking out at the future they were building, one thing was absolutely certain. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. And that made all the difference.